Well, it's really hard to talk about this place because what happened here is so, oh boy. It's a really disappointing part of our history. How we could take 220,000 people and intern them. There's nothing else to call it besides a concentration camp because they were surrounded by barbed wire. They weren't free to leave. They were taken from their homes. Many of them lost their homes and their businesses. The racial discrimination was intense for them. Yeah, this is a representative of a guard tower that would have been here around the camp, surrounding the camp with the barbed wire. Well, this is the Heart Mountain Japanese relocation camp just north of Cody, Wyoming. Linda and I have been here before. We decided to stop here today. I don't know if I'm going to make this video or not. We'll see. It's a really tough subject to cover. Linda and I just went through the museum itself with all the displays and everything. Now we're going to go over the grounds out here. But basically taking all the Japanese from the west coast of the United States and sending them off to various internment camps, relocation camps. They definitely weren't like going to summer camp. It wasn't like that at all. They were sent there for the duration of the war, weren't free to leave. It's a really tragic story, and there's some triumph involved too, though. Well, this room represents what they were confronted with when they first showed up here. It was just an empty room, no insulation at all, freezing cold, one potbelly stove, and the entire family would live here in this one room. It was up to them to turn it into something they could live with. This would represent what they turned it into. Entire family living in the one room, of course, like I mentioned. They did the best that they could, making it as comfortable as they could. They sealed off the drafts. I'm not sure how they insulated it, or if they insulated it at all. And the winters here in Wyoming are brutally cold at this elevation. Out in front of us here in the distance, you can see Hart Mountain, that promontory out there. And in front of us was the location of the internment camp itself. It was 1 mile square, and at 12 to 14,000 people, it was one of the largest cities in Wyoming at that time. I think the third largest city. But this is where it was. This is all private owned land now. It was homesteaded, but this is where it was. All those barracks that went off as far as you could see just about were all out in front of us here. Things were different in Hawaii for the Hawaiian Japanese. Let's let Linda tell you about that.
Well, I think this plaque sums it all up. It says between 1942 and 1945, guard towers and barbed wire fences on this site confine a community of nearly 11,000 forcibly uprooted people of Japanese ancestry, most of whom were American citizens. All were victims of racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and failed political leadership. I was born and raised in Hawaii, and so this is before my time. But the Japanese in Hawaii did not suffer as much as the ones on the West Coast and the rest of the U.S. because the Japanese had been in Hawaii for so long, for generations by then, and they were a major part of the population, up to 40%. And Hawaii is a bunch of islands separated by rough channels, and at that time there wasn't that much communication. My family grew up on Molokai, which is mostly rural. There's no big town. The police force was probably one person. So they were just a normal population, and most of the Japanese were not under suspicion during that time period. There were a couple of internment camps or relocation camps. One was at Sand Island on Oahu that I know of. And the other one that I know of was also on Oahu called Honolulu'uli, or they called it Hell's Valley because of its location. But it wasn't, fortunately for us, we were in Hawaii, so we didn't go through all of this. They rounded up the more educated. So the ones that ended up in the internment camps in Hawaii were people who were teachers or administrators or interpreters, and even some Buddhist priests, because the military thought they might have a connection to Japan. And that's the only reason why they went there. None of the people were found guilty that I know of. I'm sure there were some. But anyway, that's what I know about the treatment of the Japanese in Hawaii. Here's a plaque with Daniel K. Inouye's name. He was a senator from Hawaii, but what I know about him is he was visiting our high school campus one day, and just on a whim, I saw him walking down the hallway, and I ran up to him, stuck my hand out, and shook his hand, his one hand, and said, "Would you speak at our high school graduation?" And in his deep voice, he said, "I will." I was amazed. You know, a senator, famous statesman from Hawaii, And he did. He came back and he spoke at our high school graduation.
Was he interred here, Linda?
Huh?
Was he interred here?
He was in the 442nd. That's how he lost his arm. And he was a well-decorated soldier.
And this is a huge list of names of those that actually served in the armed forces, or the 442nd in World War II, these Japanese boys here. Yeah, that's the number of boys just from this camp, just this camp. And imagine with all the other camps combined. I think they formed the, what did you say, Linda? They formed the 100th?
The 100th Battalion.
Something like that.
I think, and then the 442nd was from the boys from Hawaii.
The Endo family is friends of Linda and myself. This generation of Endos today. Well, the reason we stopped here a couple of years ago, this is our second time back. We've been here and we've been to Manzanar in California, and the reason we stopped is because, not just because of Linda's ancestry, but because of my dad. My dad, at the beginning of World War II, drove bus from LA to Manzanar, taking the Japanese from the Los Angeles area up to Manzanar. I asked my dad when I was young, he told me that he had done that. He was a bus driver, had driven the bus. And I asked him, why the Japanese and not the Germans? Because the reason I asked him that is because my father was full-blooded German. And he said the Japanese were rounded up because Germany wasn't threatening to attack the coastlines of the United States, but Japan was. And that's all he said. He never spoke of the people. He never mentioned it. He never mentioned it again, as a matter of fact. I do have the belt buckle that he wore. That was his belt buckle on the job, and here's a picture of that. But he never talked about it. My dad, right after that, I don't think he did it very long, because right after that, he joined the Navy and was a Navy Seabee for the rest of the war. He was very proud of that. It says, as you look through this sight glass, you see a concrete records vault, the only remnant of the high school building that stood on this ground. And you won't see it on this camera, but it's between us and Heart Mountain out there. As you think about this, try not to look at it with 20/20 hindsight and using today's values. You have to think of what life was like in 1940 when this country was under attack by two nations. Things were different back then. It was an extremely hard time for everybody. All the American boys were going off to war. Those that stayed behind were working in the rubber factories and were farming, and if you didn't have a job like that, or if you weren't in college, you went off to fight. That's what happened back then. Serious, serious times. Can you imagine living in a normal home, running a business, maybe you had a farm, and then having the government come out, and you're an American citizen, by the way, and then having the government come out and forcibly take you away. And you had to leave everything behind. A lot of them didn't have anything to come back to. Their homes were taken from them, their farms were taken from them. Some of them were lucky in the neighbors that they had maybe saved their property and their homes for them, maybe even saved their businesses. We know of one family in Bainbridge Island, Washington, who had a strawberry farm, and the neighbors very carefully took care of their strawberry farm for them, and when they got back, gave it back to them. That was a very nice thing that happened for them. This says that down below us here was a swimming hole. Well, at least they had that. They did find things to do. Football, ice skating, Boy Scout troop, and fun on the swing set. My uncle, Herbert Herzog, was stationed in the Philippines when war broke out. Right after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, they attacked the Philippines. And my uncle and The army there that was there at the time, they fought until they ran out of ammunition, and they were ordered by MacArthur to surrender, and they did. And my uncle went through the Bataan Death March, and then he went to Cabanatuan, where he was incarcerated for the duration of the war. It was really, really bad. When the Army Rangers got in and liberated the camp, my uncle literally crawled out on his hands and knees. He was so emaciated. So many of them had died in that prisoner of war camp. But, I've never had any animosity to the Japanese for any reason. Our generation didn't grow up with that. We didn't think anything of it. The Japanese people I've known, I've loved them all. And boy, the ones in Hawaii, what a great part of society they are. But my uncle never forgave them. Just because we're of one race or another, it doesn't mean that we're all the same. It depends on where you grew up and what you were exposed to. And you can indoctrinate any group of people. And that's what happened to the Japanese in World War II. They were heavily indoctrinated. Not so much the citizens of Japan, but the Japanese military. Yeah. And that's the Japanese that the world came to hate. But the Japanese people themselves, those are wonderful people. Well, when the Japanese first arrived here, they were strictly held to the camp itself. But they were farmers, and they wanted to farm. And they also wanted to feed themselves better than what was being supplied to them. So they were allowed to start farming the acreage here. The thing is that here in Wyoming at this elevation, the growing season is really short. But the Japanese were experts at farming, and they understood how to make hotbeds and hot caps. And that was a way of planting the seed. I think, I could be wrong on this because I'm not a farmer, but that was a way of planting the seed early and keeping the plant warm until it got going, and so that when the spring did come into full bloom, those plants already had a start. That's the way I understand it. Hotbeds and hot caps. Basically what was growing here before the Japanese showed up, I think, was sugar beets, but they were able to grow everything here, and the local farmers took note of that, and the Japanese were able to go to work out here on the local farms and teach the local farmers how to grow all kinds of vegetables. It says here they grew wheat, barley, celery, corn, peas, radishes, daikon, which is it's a Japanese radish, napa, napa cabbage, potatoes, gobo, and melons. And they built root cellars and everything. Anyways, they were real successful here, growing millions of pounds of vegetables for themselves, plus teaching the farmers how to do hot caps to get the plant to get a good start in the spring. The boys that went off to war in the 442nd, they had something to prove, and prove it they did. They were the ones that rescued the American soldiers who were surrounded by the Germans in World War II, called the Lost Battalion. It was the 442nd that went in and rescued them. Those boys proved what great American citizens they were. And they were very proud of it. Here's an original guard tower. And down below us here was the train station where they arrived. The museum's right down there. But down here was also the train station. Across the way here, there's some original buildings still standing. We'll go take a look at that. I'm not positive, but I seem to remember from the first time we came here that this was, I think, the hospital up here. These are original buildings. Once again, just tar paper over plank. That's all that it is. Oh yeah, I did find a reader board. I'm sorry, there's no way to get this without my shadow in it. Hi, Rick. But yeah, this is the hospital up here. And that smokestack there was the boiler system for the hospital. And of the 10 relocation camps, it says that heart mountain here is the only one to retain its hospital system, or its hospital complex. It was completed in 1942. This is an exact construction of what the buildings were like back then. And you can see it's just tar paper and battens. So I remember shacks like this in eastern Washington farm country. When a farmer would build just a quick shack, it would just be covered with tar paper and battens just to hold it down. That'd be it. Later on, maybe he could afford to put siding on it, but that was a cheap mode of construction back then. And that's what they did out here. This one's built on a concrete foundation. I'm not sure if the others were or not, but every family had one room. Every window's a room here. So you see what I mean?
At the beginning of this video, Rick said this whole experience was a tragedy and a triumph. The tragedy we all know about. A lot of us lived through it. But the triumph, to me, was hard to see until standing here. It's that the triumph part is that we learned that an American citizen is an American citizen. And an American citizen can look like me, can look like Rick, can look like our kids who are a mixture, can look like a Native American, can look like a dark-skinned person, light-skinned person, no matter where they're from. But if they are an American citizen, you should be treated like an American citizen. That's the triumph.
Well, Linda and I had a lot of trepidation about doing this video. We came here, we were wanting to do the video, but when we started, there was just so much involved, and we didn't know if we could do it with...
Give it any justice without putting any of our
feelings into it?
Yeah, good or bad.
Good or bad. I got some bad on my family. You heard about my Uncle Herb. And Linda's was okay in Hawaii, but her family, her father was there and her mother, they went through it all. Anyways, I think we're going to go ahead and make the video and go ahead and put it up. And I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you learned something from it. Please don't be critical.
Yeah, because it's in the past and this is now.
It's something that happened. It's part of our past. Can't help that. Hey guys, thank you very much for coming along on this one. And we'll see you around.